at the moment, when we have all this extreme capitalist, condition, where we have a situation where the gap between rich and poor continues to increase, where we know that the service of an architect or professional is perhaps of its top in terms of how expensive it is, right? The purpose today of architecture is without doubt not social, right? And that's, I think, where we stand at this point.
I would say that the practice is probably a bit narrowly construed in the sense of the architectural practice for decades has been focused on providing a service to clients and possibly working outside of the realm of the community discussions or expectations, or maybe some of the larger challenges, the big picture challenges in which they're operating.
I think historically was not like that. So I think it's much more a kind of condition of today in which architecture has been deprived for this incredible power that it had to imagine a different society and actually to give shape to something that otherwise it remains as a discourse. But I think on our side, what would be interesting to think about is not to give for granted the relation with the clients, and not to give for granted the relation that we have only to look at the profit. We have only to understand architecture as a sort of commercial, in its commercial dimension.
Architects often, I think, or design practices often want to work within the vacuum of, well, I'm just going to design this beautiful thing and it will have its own life, and that's just not the way we experience the built environment at all.
So I have a kind of bit of a problem with the term of social architecture, because all architecture is social in a way. People interact with the built environment every day. Most of the world is made by people rather than by architects.
So I don't see whether or not architecture has or not a social purpose. Architecture is just a thing, right? And that thing, according to where it's corresponding, where how it's being used, how it's being, changes its meaning. And I think this is one of the reasons I started to lose interest in architecture.
And I think now is the question has to do more of how we, not only as architects, are serving somehow the power, but also how we can imagine social and spatial transformations as a possibility to challenge power.
So I think there's this idea of being complicit when you work with institutions and understanding their agenda compared to your agenda, and not seeing an institution, whether it's private or public, as something that is bigger than you and so is there to support you, and you're lucky if you can engage them. They represent us and they represent the way the world is built, and so they're there to be challenged.
I think this is the time to be doing those kinds of things, to be very creative, to challenge the formulas that exist.
We should strive for a very different kind of discipline that many of us are trying to construct or reconstruct with all the questions. You are doing this by precisely arranging these interviews because those are the questions. And then hopefully your generation will actually have the courage, and it will be intense enough to actually mobilize a new kind of movement, that addresses that situation today. And that not only goes to architecture, that goes to all disciplines. I say this because a lot of the work of cohabitation strategies, if not all, has focused on what we have discussed since we started, on this issue of transdisciplinarity. Now, transdisciplinarity for us is not multidisciplinarity or is not interdisciplinarity. I want to stress this very well, okay? Transdisciplinarity for us is when a discipline disappears and blurs itself in many others.
I think it's also important that we are able to recognize that there are other knowledges that have been marginalized. They are not even, in some cases, considered knowledge. that actually is a way for us to re-energize our profession, you know, that can re-energize the possibility for us to make the work relevant.
You know, there's no point worrying about this, you just got to get out there and do something, and I think that's what you see amongst kind of architecture collectives that are emerging. This form of like working together as a more kind of horizontal practice is about being able to kind of reach out and just start doing things on a local scale.
The Gale practice and Institute have worked together on quite a few pilot projects. Those projects often they could just go away and we could just do, you know, a water feature here, a pop-up here, whatever. But we are insisting on the connection to a larger policy discussion. And that is where you would get a system change.
It's like, well, it's like the butterfly effect, right? It's like you do one small thing and then later you've got like a kind of industrial park and you're like, how did this happen? So I think it's more about a scale of thinking than a physical reality.
Now, we believe that the new practice, or new urban practice, has to do more with, again, designing those processes. And we are at the verge of, I guess it will take many generations, of inscribing what this new kind of practice is needed if we really want to respond to these enormous disparities that are around.
And so we think very much that we will get into the realm that I think a lot of architects avoid, such as looking for where there's opportunity to tweak a policy.
I think the one thing that perhaps maybe in Assemble we do have is this notion that every action is political and has an implication which is political, and so understanding that across the scales is probably the kind of most important thing.
That is also a great possibility, you know, to envision something which is different from what exists today, and makes things tangible. And that is only architecture can do that. And that for me was the political discussion architecture can shift. That, you know, when people saw the model, you know, how we imagined, you know, the possible reuse, for them was done. You know, that was the new reality. That is an incredible power architecture have.